Hello, I'm Daniela. In today's video, we're going to make a slow-stitched faux postcard. We're going to use beautiful strips of fabric. You can use scraps, anything you have in your stash. Combine them with a few stitches, and then stitch some text onto your postcard. With the stripes, it gives a perfect opportunity to fill in those areas with text. Just choose a short saying. Could be a personal motto, something inspirational, or even just your name. Fill the letters into the stripes, and then you have a beautiful result. You can use this in fabric books, you can make a postcard on the back of it, or just use it in your work. It's a really fun and beautiful way to not only use scraps, but create something somewhat inspirational. So let's get started.
So here is an example of this technique where you make stripes, and they're not parallel lines as in lines, but they're just parallel shapes, parallel stripes. There's no rhyme or reason to them. It's using what you have, what fabrics coordinate, and what you really like. And then I added some text, "Be wild for a while." It's just kind of a fun little take. You could add any little quote or names or anything that really inspires you. So to get started, I have just my little piece here. I'm going to make a small little card, kind of like a playing card size, for my final product here. And then I have some fabrics that I've already went and chose. Now I chose a lot of fabrics here just because I like the basic color. And from there I chose some embroidery floss. This is one by Anchor, Coates & Clark. I'm not particularly fond of it. The colors are beautiful. I think it's very clever that they store it on a little spool, but I'm not really fond of working with it. It's just not the nice feel that the satin DMC floss has. But to counteract that, I just make sure I use my little beeswax and I run it through the floss. And I'll show you how I do that before I start sewing. This is color 185. It's a very beautiful color and it goes nicely with these. In fact, I bought it mainly because of the color. I have my Frixian erasable pen here. This is to trace out the writing, but I'm going to hold off on doing that. And I chose this black pearl to use for the text for the writing, so I'll just set that aside for now. Now to start with, it takes a little bit of time to make the stripes because you want each one to be parallel. You could make them all the same shape, but I think there's a lot of interest when they have different curves that do different things. So with all my fabric here, I'll just lightly fan it out so I can see where I want to start. And I think I want to start with this bright blue one. You could make just a raw edge, but I'm going to tuck my edges over. I kind of like that look. So I'm going to cut my fabric down just because it's easier to work with. And then I just start by creating the shape I want for the base piece. So I like the way that looks, but I don't want that straight edge. So I'm just going to create some gentle shapes with my scissors. And again, there's no rhyme or reason to it. It's whatever you like. You'll have a lot of fabric scrap left over. Now from here, I just have an idea of where I want my piece to be. It's really quite large, so I'll just move it down until I get an approximate shape that I like. And I do like this little curve here, so I'll just clip this down a little. So roughly that's the first stripe that I have, and I can play around with where I want it on the end. And now I want to just go through my little fabrics that I've selected and see, because this is kind of a solid piece, I think I want to have a pattern next. And I'm going to jump right in with this pattern. I like these little blues here, so I'm going to try and capture some of that. So what I'd like to do, I'll set aside my blank piece there, is just audition where I want the fabric to be, the print to show up. And then I'll just make that line. So I just sketch over that line so that I have that shape. And then I'll decide how I want the shape to be on this side. And so I'll cut this out. Now I can tailor this to the size I need at the end, if it's too large or too small or what have you. So that's starting to come along. It doesn't have to be a perfect match, but that's pretty good. So now I need some fabric up here. I think I'll jump right to this one. So I'll move this to the side and do the same procedure. I want to echo the shape for the top of the stripe, and then choose a shape here. I think I'll have this bellow out and come down. And again, I cut that out. So now I have 3 stripes. My fabric isn't much larger, my base fabric, so now I just need a final piece to end this. Oh, and I like the way this looks with it. So this will be my top piece. I'm going to fold it over so I don't have to make that second cut, but I do need to get that nice shape. So I'll trace around that. Make the cut, and then place the fabric on my base fabric. So now I play around with determining where I want the stripes to be on the fabric and how much overhang to have. Actually, on the first try, that worked out really well. I'll pin it in place, and I'll start by pinning this one here. And then this one. And now I just want to make sure I maintain that parallel edge. It doesn't have to be perfectly parallel, but close enough. And then the same thing up top. And I'm going to use a second pin up here. And now, since I know I'm going to fold this over, I'm going to fold it over right away. I'll adjust my pins. And I'll do the same thing with the bottom piece here. So now as I stitch, I'll tuck my edges in here, but that's optional. You might not want to tuck your edges, you might want to leave them raw. I like the way that looks tucked, but I'll do that as I go. So now for my thread, I'm going to stitch all the way around the perimeter of each of these stripes, and I'll treat each one individually. I'll take my length of embroidery floss, and there seems to be a little knot there, so I'll snip that, set that aside. And then I just take my wax. This is beeswax. I'll take a little piece here, hold my thumb, just so that I can make sure that it goes through the beeswax. And then while still holding that thumb down and holding it on this side as well, I'm just going to pull it through the beeswax. You can do this 2 or 3 times. As your beeswax starts to wear down, you can see how it looks from all the strands I've pulled through it. And then when it wears down, I'll just get another disc of beeswax. Then I can take my thread and thread my needle. Now here's where you decide how you want to stitch your piece. I'm going to fold over the edges as I've stated, and I'm just going to make a little straight stitch. So I just come up from the back and stitch down, and you determine the length of your stitches as well as the spacing between them. So I'll stitch around the perimeter with all these shapes, and then we'll come back, remove the pins, and write our text, whatever that might be, on the stripes. So now I've stitched all around each of these little stripes here. You can see on the back, I folded it over, knotted my thread in various places. So now I have a little card here. Before I iron off all the little pen marks, I want to write some text here. And I choose to write text on the solid fabric. You can write it anywhere and then stitch it. I just think it really stands out with the solid fabric, and so I also chose some 8 black pearl cotton thread to do my stitching. So I like to fit my words nicely inside the piece here. You can just write your words on a line if you wanted, but I'm going to really stretch them out to fit the shape of that curve to really emphasize that design element. So I'm just going to write "let it go." So I start out with my first word, and I know it's a short one so I can really space it out. And then I like to add my last word, and then I kind of fit it in from there. So I just go, and now I just need to add it. And I make the tops of the letters follow the curve as much as I can. I just think that works out well. So from here, I'll take my thread and I'll start stitching the letters. And I like to either use a split stitch or a stem stitch. So to do that, I come up the top of the letter, in this case the L, and I can either stitch one stitch and make a full L like this, which is very effective, so I think I'll do that here. And then I add the little bottom part of the L. And I can do the same thing with the E and the T. If I have a longer letter like that G, I'll show you what I do. If I have a longer letter or a curve, I'll use that stem stitch or the split stitch. And when I get there, I'll show you how I do that. But for now, these letters for let and it are very short, so I can just make little stitches. Then I'll just show you what I do with the circle. I can speed this along so you can get an idea of how it comes together, and then all the work that goes into creating that rounded letter. So to start with the G, it's the same premise for the O. I like to make smaller stitches than I did here. This way I can get a nice curve. So I'll start right here, the top of the G, and make a little stitch, but leave a little loop. I don't pull it through. And then I turn that loop to the side, and always on the outside of the letter, I'll just pull that through, make another little stitch, a short stitch, again with the loop, come up from the center of it and pull it through. And this is how you obtain a nice little curve. The smaller the stitches, the smoother the curve, because there are less straight lines to make that curve. Because this is a fairly large letter, I can do maybe a 1/4 inch distance on some of those stitches. On that little tight curve though, I make my stitches a little smaller, and that's how I adapt to stitching the font or the text onto my work and make it legible. So I'll just finish up here, speeding it along so you can see it. Always keeping the loop to the outside of the letter. If you start and you make the loop on the inside of the letter, just continue that. Just be consistent with whatever you do. So there I stitched my little text onto my work. I'll knot the back over here and then get out the iron and remove any of that ink that remained from that erasable pen. So now when my ironer is hot enough, all I have to do is just press it on my fabric and it removes all that ink. So that's the completed striped work with a little saying. Here's the one that I showed you originally. And then you don't have to do it in this portrait format. You could always do it in a landscape format as well. I still have my stripes and my text. I added a little button here just for a little something extra. And I'm really pleased with the way these came out. They're really cute little, they remind me of greeting cards.
So that's how I created my little faux fabric postcard. There are lots of possibilities. You can make this into a larger size piece or a very small size piece. It's perfect for miniatures as well as a full-size wall hanging. It's also great for postcards because that size is achievable and can be done in an afternoon. I like to use different color fabrics, particularly my favorite ones, and use them in my work. What do you think of this project? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. Thanks for joining me today.